The massive ship appeared near Jupiter, like a diamond catching sunlight. It was beautiful in a way that made human engineers feel both amazed and jealous. The vessel was called the Eternal Accord, and it had traveled across the galaxy carrying a message that would change everything. On Earth, satellites detected the ship within seconds. Warning signals flashed across every military base on the planet. In Seoul, in New York, in Cairo, in Sao Paulo, generals and admirals rushed to their command centers. But the ship did not attack. Instead, it simply waited, glowing softly against the darkness of space. President Park Geun-hye received the news while eating breakfast. She was a tall woman with gray hair and calm eyes. Before becoming the first leader of the United Terran Federation, she had spent 30 years studying stars and planets. She understood space better than most humans alive. When her assistant showed her the images of the alien ship, she set down her coffee cup and said only one word: finally. Humanity had known about alien life for decades. They had found signals, ruins on distant moons, and strange artifacts floating in the void. But no living alien had ever made contact. Until now, the message came 3 hours later. It was translated automatically by computers that had been waiting for this moment for 50 years. Ambassador Veltheri of the Luminary species greeted humanity with warm words. The Galactic Council, a government of 47 species that had existed for 12,000 years, had been watching humanity's progress. They were impressed. They were pleased. And now, they were offering humanity the greatest honor any young species could receive: an invitation to join the council. President Park called an emergency meeting. Within 6 hours, the most powerful people on Earth gathered in the Unity Hall beneath the Alps. Admiral Kim Do-yoon arrived first, his uniform covered in medals from battles against pirates in the outer colonies. Dr. Lee Nari came next, carrying tablets full of research about alien cultures. Trade Minister Choi Jun-soo followed, already calculating numbers in his head. General Yoon Hejin was last, her face serious as always. "Tell me everything," President Park said. Admiral Kim stood and activated the holographic display. The Galactic Council controls approximately 60% of the known galaxy. They have existed for over 12,000 years. Their technology is far beyond ours. Their military could destroy Earth in hours if they chose to.
Ow.
But they're offering friendship, Minister Choi said. This could mean trade, technology, protection, could it? Dr. Lee Nari asked quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She was a small woman who rarely spoke in meetings, but when she did, people listened. I have spent 20 years studying every piece of alien culture we have ever found. Every signal, every artifact, every ruin. And I have learned something about this council. She touched her tablet, and new images appeared on the display. Ancient texts from dead civilizations, records from species that had joined the council centuries ago. The council operates on a hierarchy, Dr. Lee explained. When a species joins, they enter at the lowest level. They must serve the elder races. They must pay tribute. They must follow rules they did not help create. For how long? She paused. 500 years minimum. During that time, they have no vote, no voice, and no rights. The room went silent. That's not friendship, Admiral Kim said slowly. That's slavery with extra steps. There is more, Dr. Lee continued. I have studied 17 species that joined the council in the past 3,000 years. Within 3 generations, their original cultures had completely disappeared. Their languages, their art, their beliefs are replaced by council standard. They did not just join the council. They were absorbed by it. President Park leaned forward. What happens to species that refuse? Dr. Lee's face grew dark. There is no record of any species refusing, ever, in 12,000 years. Trade Minister Choi pulled up his own calculations. I've analyzed the tribute requirements mentioned in the invitation's fine print. If we join at the lowest tier, we would need to give 60% of our resources to elder species. Our colonies would become their property. Our people would become their workers. We would be building their empire, not our own. General Yoon finally spoke. Her voice was cold and hard, so the choice is simple. We join and become servants. Or we refuse and... She looked at Admiral Kim. The Admiral shook his head. We cannot win a war against them. Not yet, maybe not ever. They have thousands of warships. We have 40. President Park stood and walked to the window. Outside, the Swiss mountains stood tall and proud, covered in snow that had fallen for millions of years before humans existed. She thought about everything humanity had survived. Ice ages, plagues, wars, near extinction. And always, always they had found a way forward. What do we have? She asked. Not in numbers. What do we have that they don't? Admiral Kim considered the question. Determination, Madam President. Our weapons may be weaker, but our soldiers fight like nothing the galaxy has seen. We tested some captured alien battle simulations last year. Our tactics confused their computers so badly that the programs crashed. Our science is different too, Dr. Lee added. We developed alone, without council guidance. We use technologies they abandoned thousands of years ago because they considered them dangerous or inefficient. Nuclear power, kinetic weapons, antimatter research. And our spirit, General Yoon said. We have never surrendered to anyone. Not once in our entire history has all of humanity knelt to a conqueror. President Park turned back to face her advisors. Her eyes were shining with something that might have been tears or might have been fire. Then we will not start now, she said. I want a vote. All in favor of refusing the council's invitation? Every hand in the room rose. All opposed. Silence. President Park nodded. Prepare our response. 3 days later, the Eternal Accord still waited near Jupiter. Ambassador Valtheri had grown impatient. In 3,000 years of diplomatic service, no species had ever made them wait this long for an answer. The invitation was an honor, a gift. The humans should be celebrating. Finally, a small human ship approached. It carried no weapons, only a single transmission. Ambassador Valtheri opened the message with confidence. The answer would be yes, of course. It was always yes. The message contained only 4 words. Humanity respectfully declines. For a long moment, Ambassador Valthari did not move. Their crystalline body flickered with colors that no human could understand. Confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been the beginning of fear. In 12,000 years, across millions of species contacted, this had never happened before. The humans had said no. And across the galaxy, in the great halls of Harmony Prime, the Galactic Council was about to learn that everything they knew about the universe had just changed. The Great Chamber of Harmony. Prime had seen many things in its 12,000 years. Wars had ended here. Empires had been born. Species had risen and fallen while the ancient stone walls watched in silence. But the chamber had never seen anything like this. Ambassador Valthari stood before the 47. Representatives of the Galactic Council, their crystalline body dim with shame. They had practiced the speech 100 times during the journey home. They had tried different words, different explanations. Nothing sounded right. Because there was no explanation that made sense, they refused. Valthari said simply. The chamber erupted. Grand Arbiter Morthax of the Keth Collective rose on his 6 legs, his insectoid body clicking with anger. Impossible. Check your translation programs. The humans must have said something else. I have checked 17 times, Valthari replied. The translation is correct. They said no. Representative Galeen of the amphibious Morkai made a sound like bubbling water, their species' version of laughter. Then they are stupid. Simple creatures who do not understand the honor they have been given. We must send teachers to explain. With respect, Valthari said, I do not believe they misunderstood. Their leader, the one called Park Yoonji, she knew exactly what she was doing. I could see it in her eyes through the transmission. She understood everything, and she still refused. The chamber fell silent. This was worse than ignorance. This was defiance. Elder Zalveth, the supreme diplomat who had negotiated 10,000 treaties across 3,000 years, finally spoke. His voice was soft, like wind through dead leaves. In all my existence, I have never encountered such behavior. Every species desires protection. Every species desires advancement. Every species desires to be part of something greater than themselves. Perhaps, said a quiet voice from the back of the chamber, these humans are different. Everyone turned to look at the speaker. It was Krathfer, young diplomat from the Voss species reptilian beings who had joined the Council only 800 years ago. He was considered almost a child by Council standards.
Ow!
Morthax demanded. They are made of meat and water, like countless others. They live short lives. They have weak bodies. They are nothing special. Krathfer lowered his head respectfully, but continued speaking. I have studied human history, Grand Arbiter. They are, ... unusual. They fight among themselves constantly, yet unite against outside threats. They destroy their own world, yet work to save it. They fear death, yet rush toward it to save others. They are contradictions wrapped in flesh. Contradictions do not concern me, Morthax snapped. Their answer concerns me. The Council has never been refused. This sets a dangerous example. He was right, and everyone knew it. Across the galaxy, thousands of species watched the Council's every move. Some were loyal members. Others were considering applying for membership. And some, though no one spoke of them, secretly resented the Council's power. If humanity could refuse without consequences, others might get ideas. We must respond, Elder Zalveth decided. We will send a delegation. Not one ship, a fleet. 200 vessels. We will show these humans the full glory of the Council. When they see our power, our unity, our magnificence, they will understand their mistake. The vote was unanimous. Within 10 standard days, the largest diplomatic fleet in 3 centuries was assembled and sent toward the small yellow star that humans called Sol on Earth. General Yoonhejin watched her screens with cold satisfaction. Her intelligence network had intercepted Council communications almost immediately. She knew about the fleet before it even launched. 200 ships, she told President Park during their private meeting. Mostly diplomatic vessels, but at least 40 have military capabilities. Can we fight them? The president asked, though she already knew the answer. No. Our 40 ships against their 200 would last perhaps 3 hours. But that's not what concerns me. General Yoon pulled up a tactical display. What concerns me is their attitude. They don't see this as a negotiation. They see it as a correction. They think we made an error that needs fixing. President Park nodded slowly. They don't believe we actually meant to refuse. Exactly. In their entire history, no one has ever said no. They literally cannot process the concept. They think we must be confused or ignorant or insane. The possibility that we simply don't want to join that doesn't exist in their minds. Captain Seo Minho entered the room, his uniform sharp and his face determined. He commanded the unconquered Earth's flagship and finest warship. Madam President, the fleet is asking for orders. Do we run? Do we hide? Do we fight? None of those, President Park said. We stand. We meet them with dignity, and we tell them the truth. Captain Seo blinked. The truth, ma'am? Yes, the truth about why we refused. The truth about what we believe. The truth about what humanity is. She looked out the window at the blue sky. They don't understand us, Captain. Maybe it's time they learned. She called for Dr. Bakuna, the linguist and philosopher who had been preparing humanity's formal response. Dr. Beek was a gentlewoman with silver-streaked hair and the kind of eyes that seemed to see through everything. She had spent her life studying what made humans human, their cultures, their languages, their dreams, their fears. Your response is ready? President Park asked. Dr. Beek nodded. I have tried to explain our position in terms they might understand, but honestly, Madam President, I don't think they will understand. Their society is built on hierarchy, on submission, on knowing one's place. Our society is built on the opposite. We believe that all beings have worth. We believe that freedom is more important than safety. We believe that a life lived on your knees is no life at all. And if they reject these ideas, Dr. Beak smiled sadly. Then we will have learned something important about the galaxy. And they will have learned something important about us. The Council fleet arrived 3 weeks later. 200 ships appearing in Earth's solar system like stars being born. They arranged themselves in perfect formation, a display of power and beauty designed to overwhelm primitive minds. Fleet Commander Angie watched them come from her command center on Mars. She was a small woman with short gray hair and a reputation for winning battles that couldn't be won. Her officers called her the Ghost because of how many times she had escaped certain death. Beautiful, aren't they? Said her second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Osayajin. Beautiful and arrogant, Angie replied. Look at their formation. No defensive gaps, no contingency positions. They don't expect any resistance at all. They think this is a parade, not a confrontation. In her experience, arrogant enemies made mistakes. The Council's message came within hours. Supreme Diplomat Zalvith himself appeared on every screen on Earth, his ancient face, patient and kind, like a teacher addressing confused children. Dear humans, he said, we understand that you are young and frightened. The galaxy is vast and strange, and your small world must feel very alone. But you do not need to be alone. The Council offers you protection, guidance, and purpose. All you must do is accept our friendship. Surely you can see the wisdom in this. Dr. Bikuna stepped forward to deliver humanity's response. Her image was broadcast across the solar system, reaching both human colonies and council ships. We thank the Council for their offer, she said calmly. But we do not seek protection through submission. We do not seek guidance that erases who we are. And we do not seek purpose given to us by others. We are humanity. We have survived ice ages, plagues, and wars. We have walked on moons and built cities in the void. We did all of this alone, and we are proud of it. You offer us a seat at your table, but only if we agree to serve you for 500 years. You call this honor. We call it chains with a pretty name. So we say again, clearly and without confusion, no. The transmission ended. Silence fell across the solar system. And then slowly, Supreme Diplomat Zalveth's expression changed. The patience faded. The kindness disappeared. What remained was something old and cold and very, very dangerous. You have one rotation of your planet, he said. One single day. Accept membership, or we will teach you what happens to species who forget their place in the universe. The transmission cut off. President Park looked at her advisors. General Yoon was already calculating defensive positions. Admiral Kim was coordinating fleet movements. Captain Seo was preparing his ship for battle. Well, the president said quietly, I suppose talking is over. She was wrong. The talking was over, yes. But what came next would be remembered for 10,000 years. Earth's fleet looked like toys compared to the Council Armada. 40 human warships faced 200 Council vessels, and everyone knew the math. The Council could destroy humanity's entire military without losing a single ship. Their weapons were better. Their shields were stronger. Their experience stretched back thousands of years. Fleet Commander Angie stood on the bridge of her command ship, the horizon, watching the enemy formation on her screens. Her officers were silent, waiting for orders. Fear hung in the air like smoke, but no one showed it. They were humans. They had learned long ago to hide their fear. Formation Delta 7, Angie ordered calmly. All ships to defensive positions around Earth. We're not attacking. We're not retreating. We're standing. Lieutenant Commander Osayajin looked at her with surprise. Commander, with respect. That formation is designed for last stands. It's designed for situations where escape is impossible. Correct, Angie said. Because escape is not our goal. We stand here until we win, or we stand here until we die. There is no third option. The fleet moved into position, creating a shell of steel and fire around humanity's homeworld. Behind them, billions of people watched the skies and waited. Children asked their parents what was happening. Parents didn't know what to say. On the Council flagship, Supreme Diplomat Zalveth, observed the human formation with something like amusement. He had seen countless species make brave final stands over his 3,000 years. They always ended the same way, in fire and silence. "They are forming a defensive perimeter," reported his military advisor, a Keth warrior named Vrixkull. "Interesting choice. They cannot win, but they seem determined to make us work for our victory." "Young species often mistake stubbornness for courage," Zalvath replied. "Begin the countdown. When their planet completes one rotation, we will show them the consequences of their choice." But across the council fleet, not everyone was confident. On a small diplomatic vessel near the rear of the formation, Aun Krathver of the Voss watched the human ships with different eyes. He had studied their history. He knew what they had survived. And something about this situation felt wrong. "They're not afraid," he muttered to himself. "They should be terrified, but they're not. Why?" He made a decision that would change his life forever. Using a private channel, he contacted the human flagship Unconquered and requested to speak with its captain. Captain Seo Minho received the transmission with surprise. An enemy diplomat wanting to talk? It could be a trick. But something in his gut told him to listen. "This is Captain Essio. Why are you contacting us?" Krathver's reptilian face appeared on the screen. "Because I believe there is something your species knows that mine has forgotten." "I am not your enemy, Captain. In truth, I am not sure the Council is your enemy either. But I need to understand, why are you doing this? Why refuse membership? Why choose almost certain death over comfortable submission?" Captain Sue was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that Krath Var would remember for the rest of his long life. "Comfort without freedom is just a comfortable cage, and we would rather die on our feet than live on our knees. Your council has existed for 12,000 years, and in all that time, no one has ever said no to them. Do you know what that means? It means they have never had to question whether they were right. They have never had to consider that their way might not be the only way. Someone had to be first. Someone had to stand up and say no more. It might as well be us." Krathver sat in silence as the transmission ended. His mind was spinning with new thoughts, dangerous thoughts. He looked at the council fleet around him, proud and powerful and utterly certain of its own righteousness. And for the first time, he wondered if that certainty was weakness instead of strength. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Park Yoonji was preparing for what might be her last broadcast. The planet was united in a way it had never been before. Old enemies stood together. Ancient grudges were forgotten. For the first time in history, humanity truly spoke with one voice. She stood before the cameras, her face calm and her voice steady. "My fellow humans," she began, "we face the greatest test our species has ever known. A vast empire offers us safety and security if we agree to serve them for 500 years. If we agree to surrender our independence, our culture, and our future, they call this an honor. They cannot understand why we would refuse." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "Let me tell you why. Because we remember what our ancestors sacrificed for freedom. We remember the revolutions and the wars, the protests and the struggles. We remember every time humans chose death over chains. And we know that if we surrender now, all those sacrifices meant nothing. We would be betraying not just ourselves, but everyone who ever fought and died so that their children could be free. Her voice grew stronger. "Offer us a seat at their table. But only if we eat their scraps for 500 years. They call it honor. We call it chains with a pretty name. And so we stand. Not because we think we can win, we know the odds. We stand because some things matter more than survival. We stand because that is who we are. We are humanity. We have never knelt to anyone. And we will not start today." The broadcast ended. Across Earth, people cried. People cheered. People hugged their families and looked up at the stars, wondering if these were their last hours. But humanity was not finished. In a secret facility beneath the Arctic ice, engineer Han Tai-woo was making final preparations. "All satellites are ready," he reported to General Yoon Hejin. "The kinetic accelerator network is online. One command, and we can demonstrate our capabilities." General Yoon nodded grimly. And the second option? Dr. Shin Murray, the quantum physicist, answered, "The antimatter warheads are prepared. 7 of them, each powerful enough to crack a moon. We hoped we would never have to use them. But if the Council attacks, then we show them what humans can do when pushed into a corner," General Yoon finished. "Good. Now we wait." The hours passed slowly. The Council armada hung in space like a storm, waiting to break. Human ships held their positions, crews at battle stations, weapons armed. No one slept. No one could. Supreme Diplomat Zalveth sent one final message as the deadline approached. His ancient face filled screens across both fleets. "Your time is nearly ended, humans. I give you one last chance. Surrender now, accept your place in the Council, and no one needs to die. Continue this foolish resistance, and we will make an example of your species. Others watching across the galaxy will learn what happens to those who defy the natural order." President Park's response was broadcast from Earth. She stood tall, her gray hair shining in the light, her eyes hard as diamonds. "Natural order?" she said. "There is nothing natural about your order. You built your empire on submission, on smaller species bowing to larger ones, on the weak serving the strong. But nature doesn't work that way. In nature, the weak band together to defeat the strong. In nature, the small and clever survive, while the large and slow go extinct. You have existed for 12,000 years, and you think that makes you eternal? But nothing lasts forever. Not stars, not galaxies, and not empires built on fear." She leaned forward slightly. "You want to make an example of us? Fine. But be careful what lesson you teach, because the example might not be what you expect. You might show the galaxy that even the smallest species can stand against the mighty Council. You might show that tyranny is not invincible. You might create exactly what you fear most. Hope?" The transmission ended, and across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds ruled by the Council, people watched and wondered. For the first time in 12,000 years, someone was fighting back. The countdown reached 0, the standoff was over. What came next would be remembered forever. The deadline had passed. 200 Council ships prepared for war, their weapons charged with energy that could burn cities. Their crews were calm and confident, certain of victory. They had done this before, many times. Small species resisted, and small species were crushed. That was how the universe worked. But President Park Geun-hye was not waiting to be crushed. She had made a decision that shocked even her closest advisors. Instead of defending, she would attack. Not with weapons, with something far more dangerous. "With truth, send the Defiance," she ordered. Admiral Kim Do-yeon hesitated. "Madam President, the Defiance is a destroyer. 1 ship against 200. Commander Oh Seojin will be killed before he can." "Commander Oh will not fire a single weapon," the President interrupted. "He will deliver a message, and then he will run. If he can." The destroyer Defiance broke formation and moved toward the Council Armada alone. It was a small ship, barely armed, easily destroyed, but it flew with purpose, cutting through space like an arrow aimed at a giant's heart. On the Council flagship, Supreme Diplomat Zalveth watched with confusion. What are they doing? 1 ship? Is this a joke? A surrender flag? Unknown Supreme Diplomat, his military advisor replied. "The vessel is broadcasting a transmission, but it's not directed at us. It's being sent across the entire solar system and beyond." "Show me." Commander Oh Seojin's face appeared on the screen. He was young for his rank, barely 30, but his eyes were old. He had seen combat in the border skirmishes, had watched friends die in the void. He knew what war looked like, and he was not afraid. "Attention, Galactic Council," he said. "And attention, all species watching this moment across the stars. You have given humanity 1 day to surrender. We have chosen not to surrender, but we are not unreasonable. Before you decide to destroy us, we want to show you something. Consider it a demonstration." Zalveth's ancient eyes narrowed. "A demonstration of what?" "The humans have activated something," his advisor reported, suddenly alarmed. "Energy readings in the asteroid belt. massive power signatures. Unknown technology. Above the asteroid belt, hundreds of small satellites came online. They had been hidden for years, disguised as mining equipment, waiting for this moment. Engineer Han Taiwu had designed them himself. Using technology the Council had abandoned millennia ago as too dangerous, too unstable, too unpredictable. Kinetic accelerators. Simple in concept, they used electromagnetic fields to launch metal rods at incredible speeds. No explosives, no energy weapons, just pure physics. Mass times velocity equals destruction. Target acquired. Han Taiwu reported from his control station on Earth. One asteroid, designation KX447, diameter 50 kilometers. Distance, for many shipping lanes, 2 million kilometers. No life signs. Perfect for our purposes. President Park took a deep breath. Fire. The satellites activated simultaneously. 300 kinetic rods, each the size of a bus, accelerated to 1% of light speed. They crossed 2 million kilometers in less than a second, and they hit the asteroid at the same time. KX447 did not break apart. It did not crack. It simply ceased to exist. The explosion was visible across the entire solar system. Energy readings went off every scale. The Council's sensors, designed to track the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, gave error messages because they could not process what they were seeing. On the Council flagship, silence fell. Zalvith stared at his screens, his ancient face showing something no one had seen in 3,000 years. Fear. That was a 50-kilometer asteroid, his advisor whispered. Solid iron and rock. And they vaporized it in one shot. Those weapons. They're not precise, they're not elegant, but they're devastating, Zalvith finished. Absolutely devastating. But humanity was not finished, President Park said. Show them the second demonstration. Target. Serenity Base on the Moon. General Yoon Hejin felt her stomach tighten. Serenity Base was humanity's first permanent lunar settlement. It had been abandoned 10 years ago when better locations were found, but it still stood as a monument to human achievement. Destroying it would send a clear message. Are you sure, Madam President? I am sure. The Council needs to understand that we will destroy our own treasures before we let them take them. Launch the warhead. A single missile rose from Earth. It carried an antimatter-enhanced nuclear weapon technology so dangerous that most species refused to develop it. The Council had banned such weapons 4,000 years ago, calling them barbaric and uncontrollable. Humans had never signed that treaty. The warhead detonated above Serenity Base. For a moment, a new sun appeared on the moon's surface. The explosion created a crater 3 kilometers wide. The flash was visible from Earth with the naked eye. In cities around the world, people looked up and saw their own moon scarred by their own weapon. Commander Oseojin's voice came across all frequencies, calm and steady. That crater will be visible for 1,000,000 years. It is a message. We would rather destroy everything we have built than give it to you. We would rather burn our own worlds than kneel. You have 12,000 years of history. We have 10,000 years of war. And we have learned one thing in all that blood. There is no enemy more dangerous than one who has nothing left to lose. He paused. You have 6 hours to withdraw beyond the outer planets. After that, our restraint ends. The Defiance turned and fled back toward Earth at maximum speed. Council ships could have destroyed it easily, but none of them moved. They were too busy staring at their sensor readings, trying to understand what they had just witnessed on the flagship. Zalvis' advisors were in chaos. Those kinetic weapons could punch through our shields like paper, one shouted. They don't use energy we can absorb. They use pure mass and speed. The antimatter warheads are worse, another added. If they targeted our fleet instead of their own moon, ... They would lose, the military advisor said firmly. We still outnumber them. We still outgun them. We would win, but at what cost? Zalveth asked quietly. The room fell silent. We came here with 200 ships. How many would return? 100. 50. 10. In every ship we lose here is a ship we cannot use elsewhere. Every soldier who dies here is a soldier who cannot fight elsewhere. And meanwhile, every species in the galaxy is watching. If we win, but suffer heavy losses, we look weak. If we lose, he didn't finish the sentence. For the first time in 3,000 years, Zalveth did not know what to do. On the young Vaz diplomat's ship, Krathfer watched everything with wide eyes. His scales had turned pale with shock. He had expected humans to surrender or die fighting. He had not expected this. They had turned their weakness into strength. They had made the Council's victory too expensive to pursue. And they had done it by being willing to sacrifice everything, even their own history. Their own achievements, their own moon, rather than submit. Incredible, he breathed. They're not just fighting. They're teaching. Hours passed. The deadline approached. On the Council flagship, Zalveth made the hardest decision of his long life. All ships, he commanded, his voice heavy with something that might have been shame, prepare for withdrawal. We will pull back beyond the outer planets as the humans demand. His officers stared at him in disbelief. We're retreating? Vrixkel asked. We're surrendering to primitives? We are being strategic, Zalveth said coldly. This is not the moment. These humans have surprised us, and a good diplomat knows when to retreat and reconsider. But mark my words, this is not over. We will return. And next time, we will be ready. The Council fleet began to move, slowly turning away from Earth. 200 ships. The pride of a 12,000-year empire, withdrawing in the face of 40 human vessels and a handful of crude weapons. On Earth, people watched the enemy fleet retreat and began to cry. Not with sadness, with joy. With relief, with pride. President Park Youngji stood at her window, watching the stars, and allowed herself a small smile. We bought time, she said to Admiral Kim. That's all. They'll be back. I know, the Admiral replied. But today, we showed them something they will never forget. We showed them that humans don't surrender. And we showed everyone else watching that the mighty Council can be defied. Far away on 1,000 worlds, people who had lived under Council rule for centuries looked at each other with new thoughts in their minds. If the humans could say no, maybe they could too. The first cracks had appeared in the Council's empire, and humanity had put them there. 5 years had passed since the day humanity said no. 5 years since the Council fleet retreated from Earth's solar system. 5 years since everything changed. In the Great Chamber of Harmony Prime, the mood was dark. Grand Arbiter Morthak stood before the assembled representatives, his insectoid body clicking with barely controlled rage. 17 species, he announced. 17 species have formally requested to leave the Council and join the Human Alliance. 3 more are secretly negotiating. Our empire, which has stood for 12,000 years, is crumbling because of one small species on one small planet. The chamber erupted in argument. Representatives blamed each other, blamed the humans, blamed fate itself. Elder Zalveth sat in silence, his ancient face heavy with exhaustion. He had warned them. 5 years ago, he had warned them that the humans would not be easy to defeat. No one had listened. Far away, on Earth, the situation was very different. Ambassador Kong Soo-yoon stood in the newly built Alliance Hall, smiling as another species signed the charter of the Independent Systems Alliance. The Valari were a small people, barely spacefaring for 3 centuries. Under Council rules, they would have been servants for 500 years. Under the Alliance, they were equals from day one. Welcome to freedom, Ambassador Kang said, shaking the Valari representative's hand. We're glad to have you. Outside the hall, Earth had transformed. The planet that had once been divided by nations and borders was now united completely. The United Terran Federation governed all of humanity with wisdom and fairness. Old enemies had become partners. Old wounds had healed, and humanity had not stopped building. Admiral Kim Do-yeon, now elderly, but still sharp, visited the new shipyard orbiting Mars, where 5 years ago humanity had 40 warships. They now had 90. where they once relied on crude kinetic weapons. They now had hybrid systems that combined human brutality with captured alien technology. "The 100th ship will be finished next month," reported the shipyard commander, Lieutenant Wang Guian. She was young, barely 25, born after humanity first reached the stars. For her generation, the refusal was not a memory, it was history. But it was history they carried with pride, Good Admiral Kim said. And our allies? The Voss are contributing 30 ships to the Joint Defense Fleet. The Merkai are providing 20. Even the Luminari rebels have sent 5 vessels.
Oh.
Admiral, may I ask you something? Of course. Do you think war with the Council is inevitable? Admiral Kim was quiet for a long moment. He looked out the observation window at the stars' countless points of light. Each one a sun, many with planets, some with people who were watching and wondering and hoping. Perhaps, he said finally, the Council has ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. They will not give up that power easily. Eventually, they may decide that the only way to stop the Alliance is to destroy it. And if they attack? The old Admiral smiled. Then they will learn why Earth has never lost a war of survival. We may be small. We may be young. We may be, as they like to say, primitives. But we are also stubborn, creative, and absolutely unwilling to surrender. Those are not weaknesses, Lieutenant. Those are the greatest strengths any species can have. In another part of the solar system, Dr. Linari was presenting her latest research to President Park Yoon-ji. The president had aged gracefully. Her gray hair now completely white, but her eyes were still sharp and her mind still quick. The Council is fracturing faster than we expected, Dr. Lee reported. Our analysts believe that within 10 years, at least 40 species will have left or be actively trying to leave. The elder races are fighting among themselves about how to respond. Some want war. Others want to negotiate. A few are even talking about reform. Reform, President Park repeated. After 12,000 years of slavery with pretty names, they're finally considering reform. Humanity's example has been powerful, Dr. Lee said. But not just the refusal. What we did afterward mattered just as much. We shared our technology freely. We treated our allies as equals. We proved that a different way was possible. The president nodded slowly. My grandmother used to say that the best revenge against those who try to crush you is to build something beautiful in their shadow. I think she would be proud of what we've built. On the other side of the galaxy, young Voss diplomat Krathfer stood before a secret gathering of representatives from 12 species. He was no longer young. 5 years of dangerous work had aged him, but his belief had only grown stronger. For millennia, we believed the Council was the only path, he said. We believed that submission was the price of survival. We believed that our cultures, our dreams, our freedoms were acceptable sacrifices for security. Humanity showed us we were wrong. The representatives listened in silence. I was there when the Council fleet retreated from Earth, Krathver continued. I watched 200 ships turn and run from 40 because the humans had shown they would rather die than kneel. And I understood something in that moment. The Council's power was never based on strength. It was based on fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being different. Fear of saying no. He looked at each representative in turn. The humans broke that fear. They proved that a species can stand alone and survive. They proved that freedom is worth fighting for. And now, 5 years later, we are not alone anymore. We are an alliance. We are equals. And we are growing stronger every day while the Council grows weaker. The vote that followed was unanimous. 3 more species joined the alliance that night. Back on Earth, in a quiet garden outside the presidential palace, Park Yoon-ji sat on a bench and watched the sunset. She was tired. The past 5 years had demanded everything from her, but she was also satisfied. Admiral Kim joined her, moving slowly with the weight of his years. The Council has requested formal negotiations, he said. They want to recognize the alliance as a legitimate power. They want to establish borders, trade agreements, diplomatic relations. After 12,000 years of treating everyone as servants, they finally want to talk as equals, President Park said. How times change. What should I tell them? The president was silent for a long moment, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky turned orange, then purple, then dark blue, filled with stars. Tell them yes, she said finally. We are not enemies of peace. We never wanted war, we wanted freedom. If they're finally ready to treat us as equals, then we should talk. But make one thing clear. What's that? We will never join their council. Not now, not in 100 years, not ever. We will talk, we will trade, we will cooperate, but we will never kneel. That's not negotiable. Admiral Kim smiled. I'll make sure they understand. As night fell over Earth, Lieutenant Wang Guian stood in the shipyard, looking at the latest warship being constructed. She thought about her grandparents, who had been children during the refusal. They had told her stories about that Datha, fear, the uncertainty, the impossible bravery of saying no to an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. Were you afraid? She had asked her grandmother once. Her grandmother had smiled. Terrified. But sometimes you have to be brave, even when you're afraid, especially then. Now, 5 years later, the galaxy was changing. Species that had been silent for millennia were finding their voices. Empires that had seemed eternal were showing cracks. And humanity, the small species that had dared to say no, was leading the way, somewhere in deep space, on a council world far from Earth. A child of the Keith Collective looked up at the stars and asked their parent, "What are humans?" The parent was silent for a long moment. Then they said, "They are the ones who prove that the strong do not always win. They are the ones who showed that freedom is worth any price. They are the ones who changed everything." The child thought about this. "I want to be like them," they said, and across the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, under 1,000,000 different stars, others were thinking the same thing. Humanity had refused to kneel. And in doing so, they had taught the galaxy to stand. The universe would never be the same.